All right, so let's move on to the plenary talk session. Alongside our two distinguished keynote speakers, we are pleased to welcome Professor CHOI Junho, Dean of the Graduate School of Information at Yonsei University. Professor CHOI has made significant contributions to both academic research and practical applications in design. And for over a decade, he has served as a user experience design advisor and consultant for several major companies and government agencies. Please join me in welcoming also the moderator, AOKI Naomi, Associate Professor at the Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Tokyo. So Professor Aoki, if you please.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yamamoto, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the plenary talk session of the 2024 Tokyo Forum. We've gathered at this forum to explore the power of design as a transformative strategy, a strategy to make our planet and world a better place. To advance this discussion, it is my profound honor to moderate this session with these three distinguished panelists on stage with me today. From your left to right, Professor CHOI Junho, as we just heard from Ms. Yamamoto, is a leading expert of user experience design based in South Korea. And to the right of Professor CHOI is Professor MATSUO Yutaka, a prominent AI expert who is making a difference in society by means of entrepreneurial education, as we just saw in his keynote speech. And Ms. Alice Rawsthorn is an award-winning critic and writer, and she has been advocating for the concept of design as a force for positive change. So Professor CHOI, Professor MATSUO, and Ms. Rawsthorn, thank you very much for joining this session. And to begin our discussion, ladies and gentlemen, let us first find out what design exactly means to these panelists. Since Ms. Rawsthorn has shared her views on design in her keynote speech already, let me ask this general question to Professor CHOI and Professor MATSUO first, before I come back to Ms. Rawsthorn with a more focused question shortly. So, Professor CHOI, I'd like to start with you. So you are an expert of user experience design, and so surely design is very important to your field. But it would be valuable to hear from you what exactly design means to what you do.
Okay, let me shortly introduce myself and then share my experience with the design in South Korea. I teach at the interdisciplinary School of Information, and I work with many researchers, professors, from very different academic backgrounds, such as business operation, and computer system engineers, and policymakers, and designers. And it is fun to work with them, but what I have witnessed is that it is very difficult to collaborate together with different backgrounds, and especially with the computer system engineers. And also, since the introduction of the smartphone after the iPhone, I had very lucky to work with many IT industries and companies in South Korea, and leading telecommunication companies such as SK Telecom and the device maker Samsung Electronics. And what I have witnessed is the change of the dominant technology or dominant device from PC to mobile, but also I witnessed the expansion of role and the power of the design into the everyday lives of the human society. For example, inside the IT industry, for the past 10 years, the role of the designers and the power of the designers has expanded into the decision-making process of the production, and then user research, and the marketing strategies. And also, I think it is more important to take on the part of the set of prioritize the human-centered design principle into the core value of the business. The second experience that I have witnessed in South Korea was the expansion of the design into the public space, public areas, public services, such as the government services and banking and transportation, because people have to meet the design and the interfaces of those services. And now, many government policymakers and administrators now accept the experience design or human-centered principles into their the services, public services. And so now it is very common that the role of the design or the power of design is set on the priority on decision making. So, but I'm very worried, and I believe that many designers still are confusing how to understand the introduction of AI into the every corner of our lives, and how to prepare or sustain the design principles or human-centered design process into the new future, because it is very difficult to understand the mechanism of the AI. And then the second issue is that the interfaces of artificial intelligence is different, quite different from the mobile devices, because it is very simple, problem, because we have to only think about how to make a less steps on touches on the small screen. But in the age of the AI, we have to find the answers, how to design the natural language processing, voice interfaces, the augmented reality, and robots, as you introduced in the keynote speeches before. And it is untested yet, and we don't know the examples, the best successful examples yet. So it is the challenges as a designers, and to find the ways how to collaborate the computer system engineers. And finally, I like to summarize from my experiences that the definition of design, and as Ms. Rawsthorn used this term in the title of the book, design as attitude, it is not putting the limitation of design as a specialized discipline where the methodologies, core values are only to apply to the own area, but find the expanded roles and find the ways of collaborating with other areas of experts, such as system engineers, business operators, and policy makers. And I think that's my definition from my experience is the new definition of the design as an attitude.
Thank you very much, Professor Choi. So I'd like to ask Professor Matsuo later, what do you make of Professor Choi's opinion about AI? But before that, if I may, I want to share my view on what Professor Choi said about expanding design in public space, because my teaching and research in the public policy school concerns the functioning of public sector, where design can mean to channel empathy and user centricity in the delivery of public services and public policy making. But this concept of design is not a given usually in the context of public sector. So I heard that Professor Choi just said that design is expanding in the public sphere, and public administrators are increasingly aware of the importance of design. I found that story is very promising. So thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Choi. And so, Professor Matsuo, I have two questions. So, what do you make of what Professor Choi said about the AI? And the other question is, so what exactly design means to you, your field of AI, and also perhaps in your entrepreneurial education?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Let me answer to the second question first. In my area of AI research, we don't use the term design usually. And actually, for example, we make large-scale neural networks with many parameters, and actually we design the architecture, but we don't say it's a design. We just set the layer of network, so the number of neurons and kind of unit the type of neural networks. So, to me, the design is not a very familiar word in our daily AI research. And also, if we think about the AI application or AI business, it should consider the very complex interaction between the customers, users, and so it also a kind of design, but usually we don't say design. Yeah, it's like business development. So I found that very interesting to find the difference. And answering to the first question, yeah, it's a very difficult and profound question. And yeah, in a very shorthand, side, the AI can enhance the design process. For example, using the generative AI for design, or the creators or designers can use generative AI to have some prototype very quickly, and they can show the design prototype to customers, so the iterative process is speed up, and it will eventually provide a very good quality product, I guess. But the difficult thing is if AI is more automated or advanced, maybe the role of human AI changes from now. So what kind of collaboration, what kind of interaction is best for the good design? Or it's a very difficult question. Yeah.
Do you think that given the fact that a society is increasingly AI-driven, do you think that advancement of AI will leave creative space for human to design still? So my question is, would AI help design to thrive, or because of AI, the role of design will diminish?
Yeah, in my opinion, the role of a human designer would be more abstract, than that of now, because the very simple optimization or such kind of thing can be done by AI. So humans should more focus on the more abstract or more broader, long-term, dependency of the interaction.
I see. So there is going to be a revision of different division of labor between humans and the machines in the future. Okay, Professor Matsuo, thank you very much for sharing. Now I want to turn to Ms. Rawsthorn. Ms. Rawsthorn, instead of asking you what exactly design means to you, I'd like to ask you a more specific question. And this question is inspired by your book you mentioned in your keynote speech, Design as an Attitude. And this book has a reference to Moholy Naji's interpretation of design as an attitude of resourcefulness and inventiveness. I can see why the attitude of inventiveness is very important for design. But I'd like to hear more about the attitude of resourcefulness. I think, if I'm correct, you used this word several times in your keynote speech, so it is obviously very important. So perhaps you can give us a definition of resourcefulness in the context of design and explain in what sense design is an attitude of resourcefulness.
Well, thank you. It's a fascinating question. I mean, resourcefulness is an incredibly important quality in design because it implies imagination. It also frequently is used in a context of emergency or urgent need, often with scarce resources, little technological backup. And so resourcefulness has historically often been used by individuals and communities facing urgent problems that they have to resolve without necessarily the money, the materials, the processes to hand to do so. So I think as an abstract quality, it's a hugely important facet of design, just as imagination is, ingenuity is, precision is, discipline is, and so on. And as design, really design as an attitude or attitudinal design is all about liberating design from this very restricted role it played in the industrial age, when it was generally executed under instruction by someone else, and designers tended to communicate or do the finishing touches to whether it's buildings, products, systems of managing businesses, whereby the important decisions had already been taken by specialists in other sectors. Attitudinal design is all about liberating design from those constraints, so it becomes much more dependent on imagination, resourcefulness, and so on, but critically embeds design within the decision-making process in collaboration with relevant specialists from other disciplines. So if I can use an example of this within the public realm, given that it's clearly a subject of interest here, it would be the work of a pioneer of social design in the UK, Hilary Cottam. She never trained as a designer. She was originally a social scientist and a development economist, and like most British intellectuals, had no interest in design, certainly no curiosity about it, until she went to work for the World Bank in Washington and was put in charge of a number of major irrigation projects that the World Bank was funding in Africa. And so when Hilary went out to the field there, she realized that there were significant differences between the success and failure of individual projects. So she felt the responsible thing to do was to analyze this in the hope of identifying certain strands that would work so they could be optimized in future projects, and potential problems that could then be minimized in others. And to her astonishment, she discovered that the quality of design of these water projects, which would be huge dams or irrigation systems, the quality of their design tended to be the principal factor that determined whether they would be efficient or not, whether they'd succeed or fail. So she decided to investigate this, for her, rather surprising phenomenon. And as a social scientist, her objective had always been to radically reinvent and revise our social systems in the UK, which, as with the social systems in many other countries, were conceived and implemented in the 20th century and are really no longer fully fit for purpose in the digital age. They're neither taking advantage or full advantage of the new technologies that are available, or really responding efficiently to population changes, changes in healthcare, and so on. So Hilary came back to the UK and set up a social enterprise called Participal, which, and its very ambitious mandate, was to redesign the welfare state. And she decided that design, along with many other disciplines, would be a driving force in this initiative. So the way of working that they adopted at Participal was to, whenever they looked at a specific issue, for example, they worked for a local council on radically improving its provision of care for elderly people in their borough. But the rule was it couldn't cost a single penny more, not a yen more, than the existing service that the council knew wasn't fit for purpose, but didn't understand why. And the answer turned out to be because it was a standardized service for everyone, when of course these hundreds of thousands of elderly people all had very different individual needs. So some of the services were wasted. For others, there was more demand than there was supply. So Hilary formed teams of relevant specialists, each of which was led by a designer, and typically they had trained in traditional areas of design, graphic design, product design, or whatever, and they would manage the research and development process and then the implementation process. They would treat it as a design project, even though the collaborators were psychologists, technologists, and so on, people with many, many different skills, lawyers, filmmakers, whatever. And they would also use design language throughout and discuss design principles throughout. And Hilary did this because she firmly believed it yielded a higher quality solution that was more nuanced, more precise, more imaginative, subtler, and so on. And this proved hugely successful. So she then applied similar principles to trying to re-engage disaffected young people with their local communities, helping people who'd been homeless for very long periods of time to readapt to having permanent housing, similarly helping the long-term unemployed to return to the workforce. And she embedded design at the heart of the decision-making process because she was absolutely convinced it would yield better decisions. So in all these instances, designers who traditionally would have perhaps produced a website or a booklet explaining the decisions that experts from other fields had taken were absolutely embedded in this process. And I imagine, obviously, things will evolve as technology changes and our needs change in particular, but this is how increasingly design will be active in these situations as perhaps a defining force rather than the dominant force, and always working in respectful, open, and engaging collaboration with other specialists.
Thank you very much. Thank you for explaining with such good examples. And I am also curious, Professor MATSUO and Professor Choi, I think Professor Choi already mentioned what he means what he think about design as an attitude, but I would like to once again pose this question. Since Ms. Rawsthorn talked about design as an attitude of resourcefulness and inventiveness, I'd like to also ask other professors, what do you make of this definition of design as an attitude? And would you agree to define design as an attitude? And if so, attitudes of what? Attitude of resourcefulness, inventiveness, or something else? Okay, Professor J.
Okay, for the future of artificial intelligence, we have to prepare for the how people work together to make a better applications and services for the people. And so I like to suggest to define the design as also methodologies, the common values and the processes that every shareholders can share and understand each other. And happily, the design areas has already developed a design thinking process, and it is very common and universal, the methodologies, how to make a better design products and services. And so, here's my question, and some problems that I have in my mind. That in the age of the AI, where the algorithms are just black box, it is very difficult to understand. And from my personal experience, I'm worried that it's not easy to work with the designers and the system engineers understand each other and set the shared common principles and processes working together. I like to ask first question to Ms. Lawson. And do you believe that design thinking is still valid in the age of the artificial intelligence?
Well, it's another fascinating question. I mean, as I said in my keynote, I think AI is actually a brilliant example of how carefully we need to consider the human, the societal, the ecological implications of every new technology. We know that it can bring huge benefits to our society if it's applied with precision, with sensitivity, with thoughtfulness, and critically with forethought. So in other words, I think design can play a very useful role in helping us to anticipate what the positives of AI can be, and crucially, to anticipate the negatives. I also think there is a meaningful role for design in terms of the design of AI systems. For example, we haven't discussed yet the environmental impact of AI, which is huge. I mean, we already know from the impact of large-scale data centers, many of which are deliberately put in very cold, very snowy, very icy parts of the world because they consume so much energy in order to avoid overheating and to continue functioning. And AI, because the technology is so complex, is a huge devourer of energy. And the more sophisticated AI systems become, the greater the environmental threat it poses will be. So I think that is an area for collaboration between designers and technologists to ensure that we anticipate those problems from the outset rather than allowing them to develop and then acting, which is expensive, it's less effective, and so on. But I mean, as I said, we know now that AI can have huge benefits in terms of efficiency, freeing up, as we heard in the keynote, specialists from other areas to apply their talent, their wisdom, their skills, their imagination to perhaps more complex fields using AI as an intelligent and thoughtful tool. But we also already know from applications of AI that it can be hugely disruptive, and not just from an environmental level. So if you think of, and this has been a profound problem in the United States, if you think of all the many problems for individuals and communities that the use of AI, for example, in biometric surveillance software has caused by prioritizing cis white males over anyone. And so, for example, with surveillance software, clean-shaven cis white males are likely to be identified accurately. If the cis white male has a beard or a moustache, they're less likely to be identified accurately by the software. The same applies to women, people of color, people with disabilities, and so on. In other words, unless you conform completely to one stereotype. Now, I am sure that as the AI models become more sophisticated, this can be corrected, but this causes huge problems for the individuals involved. It could affect their credit rating, they could be arrested, potentially prosecuted for crimes they haven't committed. And this is replicated in all sorts of other sectors. The use of AI in employment, recruitment, for example. So I think it's essential that we anticipate the impact of AI, positive, negative, and neutral. And I do believe that design could be a very useful tool to help us to do that.
Mm-hmm. So would you agree that in the era of AI, attitude of thoughtfulness is important? Thoughtfulness in that we need to anticipate all kinds of risks, and then we can design AI systems accordingly. And also maybe attitude of open-mindedness, so we can work with different stakeholders and people with different expertise. Would you agree on what do you make of this? Both Professor Choi and Ms. Rawsthorn.
Well, if I may begin, I absolutely believe that thoughtfulness is crucial.
important.
And also I'm confident, maybe I'm ridiculously over-optimistic, that we can pursue this and that we can ensure that AI has a positive and productive impact on society. I mean, virtually every new technology that has been anticipated as bringing systemic and schismic change to society has initially been anticipated with terror as well as optimism. This isn't new. I mean, Henry Ford's favorite saying was that before the invention of the motor car, if people were asked what transport innovation they really wanted or needed, they'd have said faster horses, because that was how they traveled. Their imaginations couldn't leap forward. I think thoughtfulness can help us to use our imaginations in a very constructive way.
Professor Che?
And I believe the core value of the design in the broader sense, broader meaning, definition, is human-centered design. We innovate products and services for the better lives of the people, for the people. And also in the field of the AI, they are talking about human-centered AI. And I believe it is a very good approach. But I'd like to ask the following question to Professor Matsuo. And how do engineers define the human-centered AI? And then for the developing applications and services that people can use, then how do you use the principles or the evaluation guidelines? Is it just really good for the people?
That's a very good question. And I want to add something with the question from Professor Che and also the Alessandro's comment. Usually, when we create AI, we train AI, we make a data set. And the data set is usually reflect the human judge or some values. So how to create that data set is very, very important. And the AI is trained by the data set, and AI reflects the value or some judgment represented in the data set. So when we make some image classification or some ranking system, sometimes AI uses the gender or age or the attributes which we don't want to use. And so there are research on how to make the unbiased AI. It's a very big theme. But after maybe several years of research, researchers found that if we make the unbiased model, the performance of the model decreases. So if we want to have the very good AI model, we have to mitigate the level of biasness. So it's a trade-off. And maybe this is also hidden in the human society. So we have to see that situation and think more about that. And yet that kind of thing is, in my opinion, that it's related to human-centered AI, and the human should take the very central role here.
So this embracing the value of human centricity is very important in the age of with the AI development. Okay, thank you, professors. Thank you, Ms. RAWSTHORN. Now, I want to zoom out our focus to talk about design as a tool to address big challenges humanities face. And these challenges can be political, economic, environmental, ecological, and demographic. And I think students is going to talk about their solution to address demographic challenges later in this forum, and humanitarian. And so there are many kinds. So Professor Matsuo, what is your view on design as a transformative strategy to address such challenges, like big challenges?
Sorry, could you? Could you?
Sure. So we have many challenges that humanities face, and we must address together. And so my question was, what is your view on design as a transformative strategy or tool to such challenges, address such challenges?
I have talked about my activity in my keynote speech, and I didn't use the term design, but what I'm doing is actually a design. For example, the building an ecosystem is a kind of the design of the social interaction, and also the incubation is making a startup is a kind of design within the business framework. So in that respect, the design should play the very central role in the very complex the interaction in the society to solve the societal social problems in the future. And because the social problem is becoming bigger and bigger and more complex, complicated, so we have to have some style of or the methodology from design to solve that kind of.
And there is this potential of design to address big challenges humanities face.
Yes. Including technology and also the, for example, law, economics, and also user interface.
Thank you, Professor Matsuo. Professor Choi, what about you? Would you share your views on in what way design can be a transformative tool to address our challenge and reshape our world?
Yes. Actually, design is a very wonderful tool for the innovation, to find the problems and find the better solutions for any kind of the social, political, or economic, or any practical issues. And as an educator, I have a big concern on how to educate that students or the researchers in every disciplines across campus, the core foundation to collaborate each other to solve the many possible problems to come in our future society. And specifically, here's my idea. What if we can educate, if we educate the AI system engineers, researchers, and students, the methodologies of the design thinking or the design process for the engineering students, then what can happen? I believe that the creating the AI solutions can be more the adaptive to every needs of the people who can use the AI services, and also more create alternative ways to utilize the biases and misuses of the AI systems. So it is just my idea, and as an educator, Professor Matsuo also have some views on how to better educate the future AI developers and system engineers.
Yeah, thank you. I agree that teaching, educating the design to the AI developers would be the very good idea, and they will, expand their activities more, in a in a broader social spectrum, and because to bringing the AI in many industries, it requires the dialogue with many stakeholders, and they have to talk to the policymakers or bureaucrats or for example, the medical doctors or patients. So they have to have the design thinking or such capacity. So it is a very good idea to teach them. Yeah.
So go ahead, please.
But frankly, in South Korea, my personal experience as a professor in South Korea, it was really difficult to persuade the students in the engineering school. You have to know about the design process. You have to learn about the design thinking because you have to collaborate with many people, many people in many different disciplines. But they don't accept much.
Yes.
What is your experience in Japan?
Yeah, I agree. The design is a very interdisciplinary, process, and because for example, in the engineering department, every expertise is so divided usually,
yes.
and so the bringing the design or educating the design for the student is not easy task, but it is a challenge, and it was a challenge. So yeah.
Let me ask a question to Ms. RAWSTHORN. And so I think that my question is related to what Professor Che and Professor MATSUO has been discussing, which is about the challenge of promoting design. And Ms. RAWSTHORN, in this forum and elsewhere, you have delivered a powerful message that design can be a tool to address big challenges humanities face, like political, demographic, environmental, and humanitarian. You talked about refugee crisis and so on. And could you also share the challenges of promoting design, if any, and how you suggest we address them?
Well, there are many challenges involved in promoting design because it has been such a muddled, misunderstood concept for so long. I mean, the instinctive process of design has been pursued long before a word was invented to describe design. And but that word, it's now a noun, it's an adjective, it's an adverb, a verb. It has, and because there are so many different interpretations of design, some enormously positive, others arguably not, many of the new interpretations of design have been slightly contradictory to older ones, so that has led to more muddles, misunderstandings, and cliches. Also, design has been demonized. I mean, if I had designs on any of you, you would know I was being evil, I was craving something I wasn't entitled to, and you'd probably be very unhappy that you'd met me at all. So design is used in a pejorative sense. The adjective designer was initially adopted in order to make very expensive objects seem chic and stylish and covetable. It's now associated with overpriced crap. So it is this very slippery form, and I think the long-running attempts to encourage politicians, NGOs, and so on, philanthropists, industrialists, and others to take design seriously were imperiled by that. I mentioned Buckminster Fuller raising the alarm about the ecological damage caused by industrialization in the 1920s. No one paid any attention to him, and look what a mess we're in now. But that has changed dramatically, and it has only changed because there is now a plethora of design projects. They're humanitarian, ecological, social, human-centered or species-centered, that have proved design's worth. People are willing to listen to them. I think also because our problems are so extreme, people are willing to listen to new solutions. I mean, Hilary Cotton says that one of the reasons why she was able to drive through these very sophisticated design research projects in a field like the social sciences, which had never taken design seriously before, is because there's an intellectual crisis of confidence in that field, that it still adheres to 20th century methodologies that are no longer fit for purpose. So there's a willingness to experiment with other disciplines, and design emerged as a potentially useful tool. And this is replicated in many fields. For example, there is a fast-growing international network of young lawyers who are obsessed by what they call legal design. And this is something that came from within the legal community rather than the design community foisting itself upon them. And these are young lawyers internationally who believe that if you apply the design process to many different areas of the litigation and legal system, whether it's the framing and wording of legislation, whether it's the preparation for cases for the defense or otherwise, whether it's dealing with the copyright and other complex legal issues that AI and other advanced technologies are causing. And so they have become obsessed by the idea that design is a useful tool for them to use, and that was spontaneously adopted by them. Design is still bedeviled by all these cliches and muddles and misunderstandings, but huge progress has been made. But as I said, that will all come to a crashing halt if designers are thoughtless, insensitive, unsophisticated, unimaginative. It's only if they proceed with sensitivity, compassion, and precision and clarity that design will continue to be considered a useful tool by other fields.
So the challenge of promoting design has something to do with the fact that people are not aware of the power of design. So, and hence we need to promote it, the design awareness more.
Yes, but that historically or in recent history, say late 20th century, that was a problem. Design was not taken seriously in any of the key fields that it now interacts with to provide humanitarian solutions, ecological solutions, social solutions, and so on, and to address all these complex problems. I'm sure there are still people who think design is only a stylistic exercise or something that enables Apple to charge very high prices for its pleasant-looking computers, but that is slowly changing. I think we have a new generation emerging who will take design seriously throughout, and they're not just coming from the design sector or the creative industries. They're the ambitious young lawyers who form the global network of legal designers.
So the books, your books and forum like this is going to make a difference in people's awareness, I hope.
Yes, I hope so, but other people's books as well. I mean, Professor MATSUO and I were discussing earlier, Kate Crawford, the Australian technologist I mentioned in my keynote, has written a brilliant book, The Atlas of AI, which is the most intelligent and imaginative summary I've read of the pros and cons, the political issues, and so on. I think there's a much broader debate, but design is very much at the center. It's wonderful to see such an eminent institution as the Tokyo Forum addressing design for the first time. That's definitely a step forward.
Thank you, Ms. Rawsthorn. Now, I believe this is going to be my last question to the panel, and it is first for two professors, and it's about the view that design ought to be a collaborative practice and that unites different stakeholders, sectors, and academic disciplines. And I think Professor Che has already touched upon the importance of such collaboration earlier. And this view was shared by Ms. Rawsthorn in her keynote speech, and also I believe it serves as the central premise of this Tokyo Forum. But I think it's harder to achieve such collaboration than to just propose it. And the reason is people have different interests, and some people have egos and myopia, putting them in different directions. And also, many public policy problems are wicked problems, the problems for which not only all causes and consequences are difficult to pin down, but also there is no clear-cut solution. So the answer can be good for some people, but bad for others. And so the answer has a intricate moral implication for people with different perspectives and interests. So I want to ask Professor Matsuo, how important do you think collaboration is for innovation? I think in your keynote speech you talk about how international stakeholders are talking about AI's ethical implication and risk issues together. My question is, how important do you think such collaboration is? And do you see any conflict preventing humanities from collaborating and working together?
I think the international collaboration or the interdisciplinary collaboration will be the very key factor for the success of AI application for the better society. So we have to talk to many others in the global context, and I want to encourage the students to do that, and maybe in order for that the concept of design could be more interpretable. I mean we can, for example, we can make some dictionary or terminology to translate the engineering terminology to the design concept, or entrepreneurship terminology to the design concept, so that we can share the common sense together and work together.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And we know that we have to work with other disciplines, but sometimes just talking to each other is very difficult because we don't understand the language, right? Yes. Okay, Professor J, so my question to you is the same. And what do you think of design as a collaborative practice? You earlier mentioned about how important it is to work with other disciplines, and you mentioned that it's very difficult to do it. And is there any proposal that we can make it work?
Yes, I believe the AI is a technological tool to solve our problems. It is a tool. So we have to find the ways how to best utilize those tools in the future. And those problems should be sometimes global, sometimes very complex, that any specialized one discipline specialist cannot solve. So collaboration is a fundamental, and it's a requirement for the future. And I believe that the best way of the teaching collaboration is to change the education system. For the undergraduate students, maybe sitting in this auditorium, they have to learn the core curriculum such as literature and history, art, and languages. But the age of the AI, I believe that every student, and including the students in engineering, should have a common curriculum of design thinking or design process for the collaboration of each other, because the problems that the AI should solve is requires a very multidisciplinary issues. It's not just about the enhancing productivity or efficiency for the system. It should also control the biases and also think about the human values and think about the values of the society, such as the equality and again any guidelines for the against discrimination and so on. So what I suggest is that design thinking should be a core curriculum for the future.
Thank you very much, Professor Che. I think you shared an extremely important message and relevant message to many of us in this audience who are working in educational institutions. Ms. Rotham, what do you make of this challenge of collaborating in order to enable a design process?
I think it's absolutely essential that it's a challenge that is faced and addressed in a constructive and sensitive way. But I do think there's a generational shift on this. I think that increasingly as a society, particularly among young people, there's more and more fascination with collaboration and a far greater understanding that it can make our working lives better informed, more constructive, more enjoyable, much more fun, certainly more imaginative and innovative. And so whereas collaboration among the design community used to be seen as a sneaky opportunity to sort of grab business from other sectors, now it's seen as a much more open-minded intellectual exchange of ideas and mutual respect, and something that people really relish, an opportunity to do. And again, I may sound mindlessly over-optimistic, but I feel that's the direction that society is going in.
That sounds very good. Thank you very much, Ms. Rotham. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's been a great conversation with these fantastic panelists. But I think we are getting to the close of this session. Professor Che, Professor Matsuo, and Ms. Rotham, thank you very much for sharing your views on what exactly design means to you and your field, and also what do you think of design as an attitude, and design as a transformative strategy, as well as a collaborative endeavor. So with this, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a round of applause to these panelists. Thank you very much. This is the end of the session.
Thank you very much. Congratulations, Professor Aoki, and for the wonderful discussion about design as an attitude and how to collaborate to promote design for a better future. Please give another round of applause to the great speakers. Thank you so much.